Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. More about Career Minds after the show. So if you tuned into episode 1, 2, and 3, you would have heard me being interviewed by my friend Steve Mellor, who, quite frankly, I think just absolutely killed it. So I'm really grateful to Steve to be part of the launch. And if you haven't heard the first 3 episodes, I'd encourage you to check them out. Well, today, I'm going to interview Steve as my first guest. Steve is originally from Chester, England, and was a professional swimmer turned Olympic coach at Louisiana State University. Steve currently lives in Baton Rouge with his wife and 2 kids, and he's the host of the podcast and company, The Career Competitor. So without further ado, please enjoy my friend, Steve Mellor. Steve, welcome back.
Thank you, Raymond. It's great to turn the tables.
I know, man. The tides are turned here. You're on the other end. After 3 grueling episodes where I'm in the hot seat, now it's all you.
That's right. And who knows? I don't know whether this is going to work out in my favor or not. We'll find out.
Well, I will. I will definitely be gentle for you. And I have to say, man, I am like incredibly excited for our discussion today. I feel like over the last year, I've gotten to know you and your story, and I see so many parallels between the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, and I know that you've clocked out a number of times throughout your career, and I'm excited to dig into that today. But before we do that, I want to know, what is it like living in Chester, England? I've never been to England before, so
sure.
You know, man, at some point, I think you're going to have to take me there. I've been to Europe, I've traveled to many countries, but I never stepped foot in England. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, well, firstly, that's a deal. I mean, we're going now that you said that, especially because what I love about telling people where I'm from is that I call it the real England, the true England. You know, people over these 17, 18 years now that I've been in the US, tell them that I'm from England. They ask me what was it like growing up in London. I said, you'd have to ask somebody that grew up in London. I don't know. The northwest of England is where I was born and raised. And for me, when you look into history, even as recently sort of as the 70s and the 80s, what you'll see there is that these are people that are known for working class mindset. It's a working class culture. It's a very, as we call in those parts, football heavy culture, soccer to the US. And there's something about this working class mindset that almost feels as though it's in your DNA when you're born and raised from that part of the country. And Chester specifically actually has a bunch of Roman history, which is kind of crazy. And I joke about this sometimes when I speak to folks, is when you grow up in that kind of environment, almost 2 to 3 times a year when you're going through like the 1st grade and the 5th or 6th grade, you're going on these school trips of some guy probably our age, honestly, Raymond, who's dressed up as a Roman and taking you guys around the Roman walls and all this kind of thing. And by about the 2nd or the 3rd grade, it's kind of lost on you. You know, I was like, I've been here, I've met this guy before, I've learned all about stuff that happened back in 200, 300, 400, whatever it was, centuries ago. So you start to lose appreciation for it when you're living there. And the best part about where I am now today, you know, I'm married to a gal from down here in Louisiana, and she and I have a couple of British Cajuns of our own. And when I get to go back now to Chester and show them, I'm that kid again who's going on those school trips for the first time, not the 9th, 10th, 11th time, but for the first time. I'm so excited to say that. Do you see this? This was built like 1,700 years ago. Isn't this crazy? And just being able to show them those sort of things and have such an appreciation for all that sort of stuff. But it is funny, no matter how far away or how long I've been gone from there now, it's never hard for me just to kind of close my eyes and go right back to being in that town and just thinking, gosh, time has passed and life has changed a whole bunch from those years.
Wow, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that. And
Mm.
is your family back there? Tell me about your family.
Yeah, so my family, they had a decision to make about 15 years ago. My sister, I'm one of two, older sister, and she met a guy from a place about an hour north of Chester. And so they had a decision to make. Do we move closer to one of our children who's only an hour away, or do we move closer to another child who's an ocean away? And so they
Mhm.
made what is the much more logical choice, and they left Chester, and they now live about 10 minutes outside of where my sister's based. And the what I will say though is it does make going back to the UK a little different now, because I'm never really going home, if you will. You know, I go. We stay with family when we're there, and it's a town, it's an area, it's actually a village, specifically where my parents live now, which I don't really have any, connection to whatsoever. So we always try to make that effort to how do we get to spend 24 hours in Chester or something like that, just so I'm continuing every 18 months or so when we do make that trip over, just to kind of educate my kids on like, hey, this is where daddy was when he was your age, this is where daddy was, and just having those opportunities to do those sort of things.
Yeah, so take me back to when Steve was a kid, and you're living in Chester, and when tell me about your parents and what kind of influence they had on you. Obviously, you left England at some point, I think in your early 20s, but give me a sense of that work ethic that was instilled in you from your family, maybe from some mentor that
Mm.
was a school teacher or something. Give me
Yeah,
a sense of that.
yeah. There's two ways that I describe the influence my parents had. One was hard work, and the other one was play. And it's you may hear that and think those are two pretty different ends of the spectrum, if you will, but I actually think they both go beautifully hand in hand, and it's kind of the story of my life as well. From a very young age, I was allowed to play. I was allowed to play. I was allowed to just kind of learn on Steve's terms a little bit. And sometimes that came to my detriment. Sometimes that came to my benefit. But I was allowed to just kind of learn through living, learn through just play. And I learned a heck of a lot about myself by being able to do that. One, very competitive. Two, very self-motivated. Didn't need much of a kick in the butt to get going with anything. Once I gravitated towards it, I was pretty much off and running. So they gave me the space to do that. And obviously sport became a part of that. And I'm sure we'll get to that as we talk here. But the hard work piece, like Raymond, that's all I saw. And I think this is one of the first times in the story of our lives where we see so much similarity in our stories. Like all I saw was a mom and a dad that were waking up, tending to their kids, getting out the house by a certain time, doing what they needed to do to provide, and then getting back and rinse and repeat in the evening, right? Get us fed, get us clothed, get us ready for bed, and giving us the best chance, myself and my sister, to have opportunities. And they never really shared this until much later in our childhood, but just to put us in a position to maybe access and attain what they weren't privileged and able to. And, of course that came, as I'm growing up, I was a very cocky, smart ass is the best way to put it. I really hit my stride in that part around like 8 or 9 to about 13, 14. I loved being the class clown. I was very comfortable bringing attention to myself in that kind of way. Sometimes it got me in trouble. There's no doubt about it. But what I will say is that because of the example my parents set, it was almost as though even when I was being that version of myself, I always knew I couldn't stray too far from these principles that, my parents had worked so tirelessly to put into me. And that's where sport became that for me. That was my expression of hard work and play, so that I always knew like, hey, this is the recipe in my mind. This is the recipe for getting where you want to get to in life. Can you see the hard work and gravitate towards it, but also can you find the play? Can you find the fun in the process as well? So you never really see it as hard work, So I mean, and you talked about examples too and role models. I mean, my dad he was a silent role model. He was not a man of many words. To this day, and continues to not be. it's one of those things. If you get him on the right topic, you can't shut the guy up. But he only has about 3 topics that he really wants to talk about. So that's been the interesting thing with him. But again, that was example. It was a man that worked hard, played hard at times, and I felt that was a great example for me throughout my life, without necessarily being read or told exactly how I was supposed to be, if you will.
Yeah, I love that. I love the sounds like he was a silent force, your family,
Right.
that structure. It was, it was such an influence where, as you stray and you express yourself, you always sort of, it's like they corral you back in when you kind of like stray a little bit too far. They'll tuck you back into the fold. And I love that they support you in a way where, it's almost like they let you make some mistakes if you have to. And
That's right.
And that's awesome. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the extracurricular. We know that you took up swimming as a sport, and I'm really curious to know, how did that get started?
Well, like so many stories, I think you hear over the years of athletes that go on and pursue a sport. It started with sibling rivalry. My sister, 2 years older than me, and probably from about the age of 6 when I first said, okay, my sister's name's Caroline, like whatever Caroline's doing, I want to be doing it. And but she was also very good at letting me know that she was better than me at it too. So Here I was, 2 years her junior, getting my ass handed to me by my older sister, sorry. And learning, I mean, you talk about a humbling process for probably about 5 years, from about the age of 6 or 7 to about 11 or 12, something like that, 5 or 6 years. And then suddenly biology kicked in, and I grew and I grew and I grew and I grew. My sister to this day is only 5'4". I'm 6'4", and so it just got to a point where I could quite literally keep her at an arm's length when I got to my teenage years. But I actually got into swimming, Raymond, because I saw her doing it and saw her doing it successfully, and I said, well, I want to be good at this. I want to do this. And this is while I was also saying yes to every sport under the sun. I mean, I played every sport you can possibly imagine up until about 11 or 12. And it was right at that time when it made sense for me to get serious about one of them, as opposed to just being, solid at a whole bunch of sports. Like, hey, if there's going to be a path here that you're going to go and you're going to make it work, what might that be? And folks like my dad were great at just sort of saying, like, hey, I think this is your sport. And to commit to that and to see immediate traction with that around the age of 12 or 13, and get to a national level by about 14 or 15, at least at the junior national level. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I found it. And to this day, it's always I'll be 40 next year, and we can look back on those years 30 something years ago between me and my sister and just laugh at, say, there was that window where you could kind of kick my butt at anything. And then I grew, and that was about that at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is there a story behind your sister Caroline and how you actually started swimming? I think I remember reading that in a book somewhere. I'd love to hear you share that story. I think it's fascinating, by the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what's interesting about even just that story in general is it kind of goes back a couple of years, because I was never really taught to swim the way that you would typically be taught to swim. I was about 4 years old. We're on a family vacation, and my sister does something to me. She knows she can swim. She doesn't think her little brother can swim. And she does something to me like an older sibling would do, runs to the water, and I run after her. I'm just like, hey, I'm going to come get you. And I jump in, and obviously mom, dad, they're like, Steve, you can't swim. What are you doing? But I've kind of figured it out. I'm so upset about whatever my sister's done. It's like, I don't need to be taught to swim right now. I'm going to I'll stay at the surface. I'll keep moving. And they kind of both like went to get me and then stopped and were like, he might be all right. He might be okay.
You're like the dog who jumps
right.
in a swimming pool and just has to adopt.
That's it. And so I found a way at that moment to just simply, hey, I'm sure at some point they had to come get me. I'm sure it didn't last long, but they noticed that, oh, he kind of understands how to do this with very little instruction. And then, it got to that point where she was competing at such a high level at a young age, 11 or 12, that my competitive instincts just really kicked in. And I wanted to be able to compete with her, against her. And then eventually, once I surpassed her, what's really cool about the story, Raymond, is that while she plateaued at a point around 12 or 13 and slowly lost interest, man, she was my biggest fan. I mean, and that was when our relationship changed forever. You know, we went from being sibling rivalries around 8, 10 years old to just suddenly over this like 2-year period going from rivals to absolute best friends. And everything that she was pursuing, she's a creator. She's an interior designer now, and a phenomenal mural artist as well. I mean, some of the work that she does now, it's all freehand, and I just sit here and just admire it and scream from the rooftops how talented my sister is to this day. And she's been doing that for me now since that age of 11 or 12 when the tides turned, and little brother became, as we call it, I'm the big little brother and she's the little big sister. That's kind of how we reference ourselves and have done for many, many years. But yeah, man, I think that's where these stories get. And I know you have a lot of that with your brother too. It's just like that moment where you go from being what feels like rivals to suddenly now it's like, hey, we're kind of in this together and we've got each other's back probably for the rest of this thing we call life,
Sure. And I can only imagine that for you taking off in your career, in your swim career at such a young age, having your sister who you've looked up to, all of a sudden now she's your biggest fan. Like, how motivating is that when, like, I could just imagine if it was just become contentious and there's that energy that, maybe that negative energy, the difference of that versus, someone who was an inspiration to you and then decides that the sport's not a sport that she wants to pursue anymore. Yeah. And then all of a sudden she's now focusing all that energy on you. That had to be incredibly motivating for you.
It was, and it taught me something that to this day, I would argue I'm actually teaching some of this now in the work that I do. Is that was the first lesson in life of the power of when someone that you have such respect and admiration for returns that, you suddenly feel this organic accountability that you didn't know existed. You didn't know accountability on those terms existed until you feel that. And suddenly now it's like, man, forget doing this for me. Like, my sister's over here, someone who could very easily, to your point, she could just turn around and be like, to heck with you. I didn't want to do this anyway, sort of thing. She could have had that kind of attitude, but instead she was at all my meets. She would probably be the one that let me know I did well when sometimes I didn't want to necessarily believe I did well. Like, she was that kind of voice, and that it's special. It makes you like it. Fast forward to when I came over to the US and I'm doing all these swim competitions where my family aren't there. They're in the UK, and they would come over annually for the big competition at the end of the year. But all these races that you do, you touch the wall and there's no family members in sight. Friends, teammates, it's great. It's awesome. But knowing that you have that moment coming up about an hour from now when the competition's over, where you get to send that message to my sister and just say, hey, Sam today won 2 events, came second in 1 or whatever it is. And she's just like, hey, you'll get all 3 next time or something like that. To that day, like still, 10 years later after I decided that swimming was going to be my thing. And she's like, I'm going to move away from it. And we're still cheerleading each other to this day. It's,
man, I love
trying
that.
not to get emotional. You get me emotional here at 7:30 in the morning. So I appreciate it.
I got to tell you, I love that. It's almost like, when you were there in England and she's at your meets, and that accountability, that's so powerful, where that energy, that accountability, that you want to make your sister proud. And then now you're across the pond, and now everything that you're doing, it's almost that, like, she doesn't have to be there. Like, it's like her spirit is living within you, and you still have that accountability. That's powerful.
It is. And it's so funny. I mean, I can even, in those moments, if I just like kind of close my eyes for a moment and think back to some of those years swimming in college over here, And I could get out of a race and be like, if my dad were here right now, he would say this. If my sister were here right now, she would say this. Like, I just knew. My mom never had anything to say because she didn't quite understand swimming. So she was just that mom that would just scream and clap her hands no matter what happened in front of her. Which is, again, you need that person in your life. Don't get me wrong, but she didn't ever have much to provide from insight because she didn't necessarily understand what was going on. But yeah, man, I think that stuff is powerful. And like I said, to this day, even to this day, I mean, everything that I have for myself now, that I've built for myself now, that I've worked on for so long, I can still go back and think, man, there's people that aren't around that still really care about how you're doing and how you're producing what you're producing. And on those days where you don't necessarily want to do it for yourself, maybe do it for them,
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm sure listeners are dying to know, you mentioned you living in the deep South, you're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and you clocked out. You made that first choice to leave England. And give us a sense of what that was like in terms of making the choice to leave the country and move to the States.
Yeah, well, I mean, you may have picked up on it a little bit already in my childhood, but it was this trait of mine that grew stronger and stronger as I went through my teenage years. Was that once I decided or had a feeling that something was right for me, I just went. I just committed. Like Raymond, I have no idea who taught me that, because I had no one in my childhood, parents, family, friends, no one who exemplified that in any way. But for me, I've always had this sort of inner voice, intuition, gut feeling, whatever you want to call it, that when I feel as though I'm on a path, or a path has been presented to me, or an opportunity has been presented to me, that I think this is right for me. I don't overthink it. I don't question it. I just say, let's go see. Let's go see. And that opportunity came in 2004 when I was offered the chance to go swim at North Carolina State in college. And it took me all of maybe 2 phone calls to say, listen, this is what I want. This is the right time in my life for it. It's a place where I can kind of have my cake and eat it too, in the sense I get to pursue my swimming and really have this thing that I do value by that point, about 19, 20 years old. It's like, I want an education. I want something that I can lean on for the rest of my life, because swimming is not a lifelong sport. And so, yeah, man, with that said, I jumped at the opportunity to go to North Carolina State, which became 4 years of undergrad and 2 years of master's degree, where I actually moved into swim coaching for my master's degree, which was, again, I mean, shoot, in many ways that was clocking out, because I had this whole idea of what I was going to do with my education. I was a communication media degree. I wanted to go into broadcasting and TV and all sorts of stuff. And then accidentally almost tripped and stumbled into swim coaching, because, and I think I may even have spoken about this before, is this notion of, I had a shoulder surgery right after I was done with my swimming career. My shoulder was hanging on by a thread, to say the least, by my senior year, and had the shoulder surgery, started visiting the pool just to go see old teammates, and found myself just kind of imparting some thoughts and what I would see when I was there. And the strangest thing happened, man. Like, people appreciated the insight. They appreciated the insight, and I just went, ooh, that's interesting. That was a weird feeling I just got when I provided insight and someone returned it with a, oh, wow, appreciate that. Or, oh, wow, thank you. Or then I would actually see them apply it in the water in front of me and be like, huh, that's pretty gratifying to provide that insight and then see someone apply it. And I caught the bug. I caught the swim coaching bug, like right there and then. Like I said, turned into 2 years of a graduate assistant coach at North Carolina State. And then how I ended up in the Deep South was I just took a shot and applied for an assistant coaching job at Louisiana State University back in 2012, and had about 8 people at the time in my world that I didn't realize knew the head coach here. And so I made his life hell by having everybody on my behalf calling him and saying, you need to give this guy a call. You need to speak to this guy. And he's like, either I was going to hire you or I was going to hunt you down and kill you, because the amount of people that you had refer you to me was ridiculous. But it worked out. He was happy with the hire, and I was certainly happy to say yes to it. And yeah, and the rest is kind of history from that point on.
Yeah. So I have to go back,
Yeah.
and I have a follow-up question on the move. So you get to NC State and you start your swimming career there. And one of the questions that I have, when you make such a big move like that, people want to know, were there any moments where you felt like I don't know if this is it. Like you're living in England,
Right.
you have this unusual accent, you move to the United States, you're amongst, Americans going to this college. And I just wonder if there was a moment where you said to yourself, I'm just not sure if this is the right move. And were there any moments where you felt like this isn't right, this doesn't feel right? I'm just curious.
Yeah, man.
About that.
I mean, you're hitting it in the head on, like week 3. I can tell you that. I can literally answer the question with week 3. Week 3.
Wow.
I'm having to, like, because I went 2 years without being in any kind of education in the UK. So I was pretty much a full-time athlete working part-time in a sports shop to make amends. And then I would, then what I would do is it was around that, I would have been 19, 20 years old when the opportunity to come to NC State came. And I find myself going to these classes that are really just kind of basic classes that remind me of where I was in school like 3 or 4 years prior to that. And I'm like, so wait a second. So you moved across an ocean. You're around a whole bunch of new people. It feels like you're repeating parts of your education that you're 4 or 5 years removed from. What the heck is this? Like, what happened here? This wasn't what you thought you were signing up for. And then it just hit me in that 3rd week, like homesickness, missing people. And I remember, to this day, I can paint the picture in my mind of where I was when I picked up the phone and I called home. This was back when we didn't have cell phones. And
You weren't texting anyone?
I hopped on a payphone and dialed the number and, straight to my parents' house and just let it all out. Like, I've made a mistake. I don't know what I'm doing. Everything's different here, all this kind of stuff. And didn't know we were going to go here, but you talk about those voices, right? Those voices that you need to hear at the right time. And there they were again at 20 years old when I think, I don't need these voices anymore. I'm off on my own. I've got an independence now. And how wrong I was, just like to have those voices in my dad and my mom and even my sister, just to say like, hey, like, it's still early. Like, just take it one day at a time, take it 1 week at a time. And it's so funny, Raymond, because that week I was asking, hey, can I get a flight now? Can I get a flight home? Can I just get out of this thing and go back to figuring out whatever I could figure out in England? And it took about 10 to 12 days after that call, thanks to some conversations I was having every single day with those that closest to me, just to kind of stop, just to turn it into a place that I could actually see being home for at least a while. And I mean, golly, you talk about like sliding doors moments. I mean, who knows where I would be today had my mom and dad just been like, all right, we're looking at it now. We'll get you on that flight and just let me come home. Like, who knows where I'd be today. But yeah. Week 3. That's my answer to your question.
I love that you have it already. You had it pinned down week 3.
Yeah.
I remember I was 28 and I left New Orleans and moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I had a very similar experience, which is why I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah.
I think everyone has that moment when you make a choice and you make a big choice to pivot and go a different route. And I was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I moved there in the summertime, and that winter hit. Never seen snow before.
Right.
And I was indoors, and I asked myself, what am I doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was month 3, because the winter came, and then the winter ended. I actually picked up skiing, and then a couple of months later, it's March. And then, as you know, in the South, there's 2 seasons. There's summer and winter. and you question yourself on, did I make that right choice? So I applaud the fact that your parents and your sister were there for you, and you got through that period. So now you're in Baton Rouge, and you're a swim coach there. You're doing. It sounds like you're now living your new dream
Mhm.
as a coach.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was everything that I thought it was. It was everything that I thought it was supposed to be at first. At first it's like,
Hmm.
okay, they want you to come in, they want you to regalvanize this men's program. It's kind of what I did, and I was assigned like 2/3 of the men's team, and we had this great year. We had this great year where we got off and running, and I set standards and felt as though my voice was really being heard and was creating and shifting the culture in a really positive way. And we had a lot of success very quickly in terms of the folks that I was coaching. And so, yeah, I felt like, hey, this is what it was supposed to be. And then I had a 2.5 year moment where I had to go back to the UK. And after just 1 year in Baton Rouge, which was not the plan. That was not the plan at all. Because I put my future in the hands of a couple of people that weren't necessarily equipped to take care of it, and people that were working within the university and in the international department, and they were supposed to get me this visa, and they just didn't do what they were supposed to do. And fortunately, I'm 12, 13 years removed from that now, and I've very much made peace with that. But you talk about other moments in life and that define you and set you off on a path. I went from, this was mid-July in 2012. I was told this information that the visa's not coming. I had to be out of my apartment, packed, and back in the UK by the first week of August. So in the space of 2.5 weeks, I went from, all right, let's figure out the next season. Let's keep this thing going. This visa's going to show up any minute now, to pack your bags, go back to England and figure it out. And to say I went back to nothing, Raymond, is an understatement. I mean, aside from family, that was it. I didn't have any connections. I had no network. It's even to this day, it's still hard to go back to that sort of 6-month period when I first went back to the UK, because it was awful. It was awful. I was at rock bottom. I was in depression. I'm even comfortable saying I was suicidal. I was there for about 3 months, and that was when I really had to start doing some serious work inwardly and just figuring myself out and saying, hey, this can't be it. This cannot be the Steve Mellor story. This cannot be how it ends. And so at the beginning of 2013 now, I just decided, like, hey, it's time for you to at least, you cannot control what's happened, and you probably can't control where your head is and your heart is right now. But what you can control is just getting up every day and just trying to establish a couple things that made Steve Mellor who he was, at least up until this point. And I found exercise again. I found routine again. And routine turned into a little bit more clarity, and clarity turned into, I think I just need to be around a swimming pool again. And Raymond, like, I kind of just put my ego to one side and started teaching kids how to swim. So I went from the top level of the sport there in 2011, 2012, and having competed at it. And I said, it is healthier for you just to simply be around the sport of swimming at this point in your life and just teach and just be in that environment than to worry about the standard to which you're doing it or anything like that. And to this day, that I say it to this day, it saved my life. That saved my life. That just decision to say, hey, go teach kids how to swim. And I did that for a year, and I got so much love and appreciation and found myself again and really started to evolve and grow as a human again. And then I decided to go into personal training for a little while, and kind of to bring that whole 2.5 stint to an end. My old boss sort of told me around mid 2014 that, hey, if you want to do your due diligence this time and take complete ownership for it, why don't you go ahead and figure out if you can make it back to the US? And if you think you can, I have a job waiting for you. And so I took ownership completely this time, paid all the bills and all that kind of thing, and made it happen and brought myself back. January 1st, New Year's Day, 2015, I moved back to Baton Rouge, and I'm still here to this day. Yeah, I don't tell that story much, Ray. So you got.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your vulnerability. it's chilling because I feel like that screw up that the administration had took you to a place that just rebuilt, like almost rewired who you are as a person in a very weird way. I don't know. It just seems like when you look back, at the time you're thinking to yourself, like, why is this happening to me? But how much growth did you get out of that? It's incredible.
It is. It is. And it's a message that the few times I have told that story, I always try to sort of emphasize that to anybody who's hearing this, and maybe you can relate to it. Maybe you feel like you're going through something like this, whatever it might be. I think the moment you can just latch onto something that represents who you are in your most purest way, not the way you want to be seen by the world or anything like that. Just like stop and ask yourself, like, who are you? Like, what makes you feel truly fulfilled? Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about the ego or anything like that. And I just thank God now to this day that I was able to have that sense of clarity of just like, hey, just go to where you're valued. Just go do something where your greatest offering at this point in your life can be received and can be valued. And then life will start to probably present a few opportunities and doors and all this kind of thing once you just get back on the rails. But to begin with, identify with what you know you do well, with what represents you at your best, and find a place where that can be of value to someone, and things will start to figure themselves out.
I love that. So inspiring.
Thanks, man.
So you're back in Baton Rouge, and I want to take the journey now from Baton Rouge, LSU, to executive coach.
Yeah.
And that's the second clocking out from my perspective. So take us through that transition.
Yeah. So from 2015 till the summer of 2021, I became the associate head coach at LSU, and every single season just kind of kept building on the one before. Took athletes to the top of the SEC, All-American status in NCAAs, and then kind of had two defining moments actually over the course of about 2.5 years. One was actually the start of my podcast. So I started my podcast in 2018. It's called Career Competitor. And at the time, it was just, if you remember earlier, I said I wanted one day to be in media and broadcasting. It was like, podcasting is kind of this thing that's starting to become something. This was before the COVID uptake, that when everybody kind of got into podcasting. And, for me, I saw this as a really cool way just to say, okay, this is who I am at my most purest self outside of swimming. And what I get to do here is just talk to people and this was the idea and the mission of the show when we first started, talk to former athletes about where they are in their journey and how they still rely on the same characteristics in whatever respective field they're in now, the way in which they would utilize them when they were an athlete. And so that was the idea for the show. And it's evolved a lot over time, but funnily enough, about 1.5 years into that journey, I started to get feedback from people that would come on the show. People like yourself, Raymond, who CEOs, been in corporate America for a long, long time. And they kind of started telling me like, hey, you have a way of listening and then turning the question around in a way where you're listening on another level. You're not just listening to the answer and then asking me a question. There's something there that you do, and you do it well. And I would just say, thank you. And then I get back in my car and go back to the pool and carry on swim coaching. But this kept going. This kept happening. Every other episode, I'd get this kind of feedback. So kind of put that out into the universe. Like, hey, what's that about? But then in 2018, too, I recruited this young guy called Brooks Curry. And it took me 1 year to bring him into LSU. And in 2019, he arrived. And so this timeline, and this is the weird part about it, Raymond, the timeline is just like almost to the month. It's so surreal, the way in which it all kind of came together. But anyway, I recruit this kid. He comes in, 18-year-old, up-and-coming, talented, and but not highly recruited. And he's like my best-kept secret. I'm like, I see something in you that nobody else does. Awesome. Like, that's great, because I'm going to get it out of you, and everyone's going to look and realize how stupid they were for not recruiting you. And he came in 2019. By the end of his freshman year, he became the SEC champion in the 100-yard freestyle, which is unheard of. That's one of those events where you don't win freshman year because it's for the sort of big, strong guys. It takes a couple years to get that kind of muscle and power in your body. And kid came in and just took to my training, took to my culture real quick. And things happened quickly. And then we all know 2020, COVID hit. But this kid had an idea. He wanted to go to Olympic Games. And so we had to put that on the back burner for a year. Those games got pushed back a year. I'm still doing my podcasting. I'm still doing sim coaching. But in the spring of 2021, my mind is starting to go to, I think there might be something else to this life of mine than sim coaching. But while this is happening, Raymond, I have this athlete of mine. I have a lot of athletes that are doing well, but this one athlete of mine who is on the brink of doing something historical for LSU. No, LSU had never put an American on an Olympic team. So imagine the kind of like the conflict there. It's like, okay, one mind I'm like, okay, clocking out, thinking about next step. But on the other side, I've got this thing in the swimming world at the time that's saying, why would you run away from this? What are you doing? What are you talking about? Why would you think this? So we go through the spring of 2021. He has an amazing phase of training, and lo and behold, he goes to the Olympic trials and he places fourth in the 100 freestyle, and it's a relay event. And so he qualifies for the U.S. Olympic team in the 4x100 freestyle relay. And I'm just like mind blown, can't believe it. Running around Omaha, Nebraska like a crazy guy, cannot believe we've actually pulled this thing off. Had so much adversity in actually achieving it, and it happened. We actually pulled this thing off. The most ridiculous of goals happened, and my hairs are up on my arm while I'm talking to you about it because my mind immediately goes right back there. And I'm just like, I'm in the stadium, and it's crazy, and it's, oh my gosh, so much stuff. And then 6 weeks later, he goes to the Olympics, and he's part of the 4x100 freestyle relay team that wins the Olympic gold. So now he's an Olympic champion, and I'm just like, what? Wow. Like, what? This is crazy. So obviously there's a lot of people in this industry that are saying, like, how did you do it? Like, what's your next step as a coach? What are you going to do now? And a month later, Raymond, I leave swim coaching. I just, from sort of that mid-August to mid-September of 2021, I just decided, I said, wow, this was incredible. I actually think this was the sign that I needed to clock out. I got to the top of this mountain in the swim coaching world, and I didn't feel at the top of that mountain what I feel as though I should feel. I didn't feel some like, oh, wow, here I am now, I belong now, or anything like that. I actually felt like, oh, shoot, I think I'm on the wrong mountain. I think I've been climbing the wrong mountain this whole time. Even though I've known swimming for 25 years at that point, most of that time being at the highest level, I'm on the wrong mountain. There's somewhere where I can be of greater value and have even greater impact than that of putting someone into a position to be an Olympic champion. And that was my realization right there. And so I took this sort of 2.5 years now of just resourcing folks that had given me these kind of insights around what I can do as a listener and as someone who asks powerful questions, and did my due diligence about what that could mean. And lo and behold, in October of 2021, I set off and as a business owner and decided I was going to be an executive coach. And it brought me to people like you, man. So here I am almost 2.5 years later, gosh, closing in on 3 years now. I can't believe it's been that long already. And that's kind of how it all happened, man.
Wow. So I have to unpack that as
Please.
we come into the final stretch, as they say.
Yeah.
So identity is huge when it comes to figuring out what fulfills you and what kind of career you're going to have. And oftentimes the work that I do, people figure their identity out when they're doing something where, they either don't like it, or they're not feeling inspired by it, or they're adding value. But the challenge that you had here is that you were on the top. You were coaching, which is essentially what you were meant to do. Mm-hmm. You have someone who wins a gold medal, is at the top of their career, and you're almost grappling with an identity crisis, essentially. Yep. But you're at the top. You're not in a situation where things aren't going well, or you have this feeling of not, like there's something missing.
Yeah.
And so that's incredibly inspiring, where you walked away from being at the top of a field that you're doing what you love to do as a coach. And when I was thinking about your career, I was thinking that there was a clean break. I felt like there was, Brooks won the gold medal, and then you're like, okay, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you were actually two steps into this new career as an executive coach, and it was almost pulling you away from a career of success. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's there's the most powerful insight that I kind of had through that time, and this is where my wife played an enormous part. She doesn't get her flowers anywhere near enough, and so this is me. She could be listening in the other room, so I'll say it a little bit louder. But through that year leading into that, coming out of COVID, and then that season of just getting Brooks ready to do what he ended up doing, there was a lot of conversations between she and I, just like, is there another step? Is there something that I'm missing here that I should be thinking about? And as I just kind of spoke through it with her, the greatest realization I had was that for all this time that I'd been coaching swimmers, I always grappled with this term swim coach. Like, you talk about identity, I would introduce myself to people and say, yeah, I'm a swim coach. And it never sounded like me. It never felt like it was me at any point. Never, not once, not even in that Olympic gold moment. It's like, it doesn't fit. I don't know why, but it just doesn't feel right. And the realization I came to through working through this with my wife, and then even some of these, very affirming moments with Brooks, was I'd never been a swim coach. I'd always been a coach of swimmers. I'd always been a coach. And I just happened to be working in this context of swimming. But there was something about my approach to coaching that felt as though it could be impactful, it could be valued, it could be somehow utilized in a space far outside of this, in many ways, tiny, tiny world that was elite level swimming that I'd been operating in for so long. And that was what really hit me at that moment when Brooks achieved what he achieved, was that, Steve, you've kind of done this your way. You've not done this from the typical swim coaching book. You're not a sports scientist. You're a communication media major. You're someone who did this based on the relationships that he built with his athletes and going that further in terms of getting to the heart of their why. This was never about the X's and O's of swimming. So what is it that's keeping you here now at this point? Now that you've seen that the way you do it, it works here. It works and it's a value here, but you feel as though there's this whole world out there that you would love to now go challenge yourself and see, can this work outside of this small world of swimming? And that's how I've gone about this last 2.5 years, Raymond, is how can I now go see if the way in which I coach can be of value far outside of this small world of swimming, and do it in a way where I'm always bettering and pushing myself to do it at higher and higher levels, no different to how I was doing it in the swimming world too. So again, I have my wife to thank for that, because she was such a resource for me through that year of just talking through this stuff. But that's what's crazy about it, was that it was in that moment of the greatest success that I felt as reaffirmed as I could possibly be to clock out and to make that jump.
I love that. So I'm going to ask you in closing here to put on your coaching hat and share some words of wisdom with our listeners. So if our listeners are sitting in a situation where they're not feeling fulfilled and they're struggling with having the courage to clock out of whatever situation they're in right now, and they're having a little bit of a struggle with their identity in terms of the work that they're doing, what words of wisdom would you give them?
I love that question, but I'm very aware, again, as a coach, I'm always trying not to put myself too much into people's shoes, but I will say this, and it's so funny because we've just, in terms of the date that we're recording this, it's a similar answer that I gave you to a question that you asked me in a webinar that I just did with you. I love having people ask the question, what's in this for me? Because it's such a powerful question. It's why it's one of my favorite questions to put to people. And so based on how you set the table there, Raymond, my encouragement to anyone listening to this is just, okay, when you find yourself and you feel as though life is presenting crossroads or decisions and opportunities, look at all the opportunities, look at both directions at that crossroads, and just say, if I go down this path, what's in it for me? But if I go down this path, what's in it for me? And see which one of those responses gets you most excited, gives you maybe the most amount of nervous energy. Because that nervous energy is your body's way of saying, like, I want to go that way. I want to go that way, you know? And too often we interpret that nervous energy as like my body's telling me to like be anxious and resist. And I disagree completely. I think our body is one of the greatest voices, not our minds, our body. Our body is one of the greatest voices if we are bold enough to listen to it. But we have to listen to it because it is very intuitive. And that's how we build that intuition. We listen to our body when it's trying to talk to us. And then we actually satisfy our body by following through on what it's telling us to do. Like that's, for me, is the fun stuff in all of this. So I can tell you that even looking back, and when I had that decision of stay in swim coaching, start a business, and to look at them both and say, what's in it for me based on either one? And the swim coaching thing, Raymond, nothing about it seemed appealing anymore. Nothing about it fired me up anymore because, like I said, I'd been to the top of the mountain, and while for 10 minutes I thought it was the most incredible thing in that moment, it left me feeling a little meh, not what I thought this was going to be. But everything about the potential prosperity and opportunity and excitement and unknown about the business, to this day, that feeling that I had 2.5 years ago when I decided to start the business, Raymond, I get to talk to you right now with that exact same excitement. Like, I hope it comes through my voice. Like, I have that same excitement right now, 2.5 years later. And it's a constant just reaffirming of, my body told me there's something here. There's something at stake here that you don't even realize yet. But that's really exciting to go figure out what that is, because there's so much potential growth in this for you if you go and just give it a go.
I love that. Well, my friend, you just affirmed something monumental for me, because my body was telling me, do not do this podcast. It's going to be too much. And I had all of this nervous energy, and you're guest number one, man. You are guest number one. And I approached this where I felt like this was right. I wanted to bring to the world people who, similar to you, shock the world. And I'm looking at your book right now, Shock the World, which we're going to plug here in just a bit. But I was feeling that. And I'm so happy that I leaned into that nervousness energy, because I knew there was something on the other end. I don't even know what it is. We're just getting started.
That's the best part.
It's
man.
like
That's
trusting
the best part
that,
about it.
like, the work that you're doing is actually going to pay off somewhere, somehow down the line. Who knows?
That's right.
It's so weird, this world.
That's right. Who knows?
But I want to end on here. First of all, super grateful that you and I met a year ago. Like, it's just bizarre how the universe works. And you're living just outside my hometown, and so share with our listeners how people can find you. Tell us about a briefing on the book, Shock the World, which is a great read, by the way, if you're interested in realizing your potential as a human. But share a little bit about how people can find you, the book, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, man. I mean, just to piggyback off your sharing of gratitude right back at you. I don't take it lightly in terms of the opportunity and the chance for me to be your first guest. And like you said, I think our relationship has been something of, it's been nothing but of great return this entire time as I've gotten to know you more and more. And these opportunities are always fun, just to continue to share more about maybe my story that you didn't know, and to continue to learn more about you. And what I will say about reaching out to me is, I can give you the website, I can give you the email, all that kind of thing. But so just go to LinkedIn, Steve Mellor. You'll find me on there. Email is steve@careercompetitor, which is the name of my podcast. Please just reach out directly to me. I love connecting with people. If you have no interest in coaching, that is neither here nor there. It's human connection is one of my favorite hobbies in life. And so for me, if you want to reach out and just connect and just chat, maybe about something that resonated with you from this podcast, I'd love to do that. And then the book itself, I go through the story that I just provided there with Brooks, but I go into it in more detail. But what's been cool about it is that through that journey, I'm able to actually take pieces of the podcast that, as you heard there, as I was explaining it, run in tangent with Brooks' story, where I can actually pull from guests that I've had on the show, and how they themselves have shocked the world, how they themselves have realized their potential. And so there's 10 different shocks within the book, and it's a high application book too, because I'm a coach and I don't want you reading a book just for the sake of reading a book. I want you to have a pen and then to write down stuff as you're going through it. So it's a book of application. And so, yeah, just really encourage you to give that a look and consider grabbing a copy, because I think it can be great for any individual, team, leader, whatever it may be. But Raymond, again, thanks again for the time, brother. I just continue to look forward to building this relationship with you for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll connect later around booking that trip to Chester. So
yes,
I'm looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to it.
To England unless you're with me. So appreciate that. And with that, we'll wrap up. And Steve, thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Enjoy your family today.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Raymond again here. And thank you to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and leadership development services. You can learn more about Career Minds at careerminds.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can find me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and think it's time for a change, I'd like you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time, everyone.